On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
It was an attack the world was anticipating. The United States had always warned the events of September 11 would not go unanswered.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Total expenses, $2.26 trillion. That's how much America has spent since 2001 in Afghanistan.
The last U.S. troops have withdrawn from Afghanistan. The Taliban we pushed out in 2001 back in control of that country again.
You know, when we left, there were hundreds of Americans that we still needed to get out. It was chaos. It was anarchy. It was the worst thing. Like, it was apocalyptic. The level of desperation, it's indescribable.
Hi everybody! On 7th of October 2001, that is just 1 month after the horrific 9/11 attacks, the American army declared a war on terror and invaded Afghanistan to wipe out both Taliban and Alqaeda. And the most astounding fact of all is that they occupied Afghanistan for 20 long years and spent $2.3 trillion to secure and develop the nation of Afghanistan. This is so much money that it's more than 5 times the defense budget of India, China, UK, Russia and Saudi Arabia combined. But even then, the entire world was stunned to see that, in spite of having the greatest military in the world and 20 long years of occupation, in spite of spending $2.3 trillion, the American army was defeated by the Taliban, who were considered to be just another primitive militant group. And this defeat of the US army has some of the most critical geopolitical lessons for the world to learn. So if you love to study war strategies, let's go deep into this case study and try to understand how on earth did Taliban defeat US army and the NATO forces to conquer Afghanistan? What exactly was their war strategy to tire out the greatest army in the world? And most importantly, what are the study materials to help you understand the war strategies of the Afghan war better? This video is brought to you by thinkschool's Communication Masterclass course. People, if you love the way we tell stories and if you want to present your ideas in the most powerful manner using the art of storytelling, come join our Communication Masterclass course. This is a 6 weeks course that is exclusively designed to take you step by step from the beginner's level all the way to a TEDx level presentation skill. These 6 weeks include special exercises and worksheets that will help you become a powerful orator. On top of that, if you have any doubts, you can directly talk to me in the bi-weekly doubt sessions and I will personally clarify all of your doubts. So if this sounds useful to you and if you want to master the art of presentation, use the link in the description and enroll for our Communication Masterclass course. To understand the Afghan war, we first need to understand the extraordinary and unique terrain of Afghanistan. And if you look at the map, you'll see that 75% of the entire country's area is filled with mountains. These mountain ranges are a part of the Hindu Kush mountain ranges, which are among the tallest mountain ranges in the world. Secondly, Afghanistan has extreme climatic conditions where temperatures go from -7 degrees to even 39 degrees. So transporting supplies during winter is practically a nightmare. And thirdly, Afghanistan is one of the 44 landlocked countries in the world. So if you look at the map, you'll see that if you want to ship something to Afghanistan, you have no ports at all. And the closest port of Karachi is far away in Pakistan. And if you want to ship materials from the northern route, you will have to ship to Riga in Latvia via sea and then come by rail through Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and then to Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. And even after you enter Afghanistan, there are no concrete highways that could actually connect the most important cities of the country. So again, shipping goods and materials within the country is also very difficult. These are the geographical challenges of Afghanistan. If this is very clear to you, let's understand America's war in Afghanistan. Now people, like I said before, after the 9/11 attacks, the American army entered the Afghan soil and they had 2 major agendas. Number 1 was to kill Osama bin Laden, which they did in 2011. And number 2 was to reconstruct the country of Afghanistan to such a level that these terror groups will have no scope to rise again. So you know what? Apart from the American army, thousands of American officers, the NATO forces and billions of dollars worth of goods, equipments and weapons were transported to Afghanistan for something called the Nation Building Project.
We work for a new era of human rights and human dignity. The agreement reached in Bonn last week means that in 10 days, the international community will have a new partner, an interim government of a new Afghanistan.
We will ensure that Afghanistan is never a safe haven for terror, but is instead a country that is strong, sovereign, and able to stand on its own 2 feet.
So you see, with the greatest army in the world backing you, and with 20 long years of funding from the richest country in the world, Afghanistan today must have at least become a developing country, right? Then the question is, what exactly went wrong? Well, as it turns out, the Americans made 5 major mistakes. The first thing they got wrong was the assessment of their key performance indicators. And if you are in the corporate, you know that key performance indicators are important metrics that we keep an eye on to assess whether a system or a company is doing well or not. So when you're putting in billions of dollars into education in Afghanistan, what should be your KPI? It should be the education of teachers and the performance of the students, right? Well, guess what? The US spent $760 million to boost the primary and secondary education by building schools in Afghanistan. But if you look at the result, the condition of teachers' education was so bad that as of 2017, only 60% of the teachers and 4% of the students could actually perform a 3-digit multiplication. Similarly, as of 2016, US spent $3 billion into a road construction project, but 95% of these sections of roads were either damaged or destroyed, and 85% of them were either maintained poorly or not at all. Now the question over here is, if so much money was being spent by the US and nothing was happening, then where was all this money going? Well, this is where the second problem came in, and that was corruption. A classic example of the same is the corruption in the Afghan army. Now people, if you look at the number of American soldiers stationed in Afghanistan over time, you will see that the maximum American troops deployed never went beyond 1 lakh soldiers. So obviously, just 1 lakh American soldiers cannot guard the entire region of Afghanistan, right? So they had to actually hand over the charge to Afghan soldiers so that together they could guard the entire country. And the United States spent $3.5 billion into training and arming the Afghan forces. But, as it turns out, even after 15 years of occupation in 2016, 80% of these soldiers didn't even know how to read and write. And as you can imagine, if they could not read and write, there is no way they could keep records or maintain documents, let alone handle complex weapons. And the most shocking fact of all is that, according to the former finance minister of Afghanistan, most of the 3 lakh troops and police recorded on the government's books did not even exist. Which means the Americans were paying salaries for 3 lakh soldiers who did not even exist.
Corruption is hampering the country's development. Case in point, reports that the U.S. government is paying the salaries of tens of thousands of Afghan soldiers that don't even exist.
We found it in the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Public Health, the Ministry of Public Works, and in the military and the police, that there are non-existent individuals getting salaries paid for by you, the U.S. taxpayer.
So the question is, where did all this money go? Well, it went to corrupt government and military officials who took money on behalf of the soldiers who didn't even exist, and the actual troops on ground were not paid their due amounts at all. This is the reason why, the moment the American forces left Afghanistan, the Taliban conquered the entire country in less than 90 days. And the fun fact is that most of the cities of Afghanistan were conquered without firing a single bullet.
Do I trust the Taliban? No. But I trust the capacity of the Afghan military, who is better trained, better equipped, and more competent in terms of conducting war.
Now, the Taliban are out in full force. They took over the presidential palace, occupied Kabul's version of the Oval Office. Afghanistan's president fled the country. The Taliban have set up checkpoints across the Afghan capital, and their Islamist rule is already coming back.
The Taliban we pushed out in 2001 back in control of that country again.
You know, when we left, there were hundreds of Americans that we still needed to get out. It was chaos. It was anarchy. It was the worst thing. Like, it was apocalyptic. The level of desperation, it's indescribable.
So $3.5 billion, as in more than 25,000 crores, was just wasted into building a fake army. And thirdly, the Americans always tried to build systems that they thought were amazing instead of actually building systems that people needed. For example, between 2003 to 2015, the US government spent almost $1 billion into deployment of a formal legal system in Afghanistan. And not so surprisingly, since the Afghans have never seen a system like a formal judiciary, none of them went to the court. In fact, the Afghans had their own informal panchayat-like system where some reputed members of the community solved their disputes. And here's where 80 to 90% of the civil disputes have been handled. And this lack of on-ground understanding is where the Taliban forces started rising. And they literally took advantage of every single blind spot to mess with America. Firstly, they understood that if Americans wanted to practice their power in Afghanistan, they would need two important things. Number one is supplies and number two is connectivity within Afghanistan. And if you remember, if US wanted to ship something to Afghanistan, they would either have to come from Karachi and then take this route to Khyber Pass, or they will have to ship to Riga in Latvia via sea and then come all the way by rail through Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and then to Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. And as it turns out, about 75% of the supplies for the troops, including military equipments, food and fuel, actually arrived from this route from Karachi to Khyber Pass. So the Taliban very conveniently kept on bombing this region, making it very difficult and very costly for the Americans to get supplies. So every time this southern area got bombed, the Americans had to take the super long route from the north to get their supplies. And this resulted into both delays and high cost. But the question over here is, how were the Taliban able to bomb these routes so easily, and why couldn't the American army capture them all at once? Well, there were two reasons. Firstly, like we saw, the terrain of Afghanistan consisted of giant mountains with thousands of caves within them. And the Taliban soldiers had such a thorough knowledge about the terrain that it was very difficult to spot them within these caves. Secondly, there was a big loophole in the Afghan-Pakistan border. Now, if you look at the demography of Afghanistan, there are 14 ethnic groups and the Pashtuns form the largest chunk of them, accounting for 42% of the Afghanistan population. And the catch over here is that there is this borderline called the Durand line. This border was drawn by the Brits, and all thanks to their genius drawing talent, the Pashtuns got divided such that now 1/3 of the Pashtuns live in Afghanistan and make a majority of their population, and 2/3 of the Pashtuns live in Pakistan. So you see, just because some Brit wanted to draw a fancy borderline, you would be living in Pakistan and all your Pashtun cousins would be living in Afghanistan. And the irony over here is that, although this Durand line is recognized by the international bodies, the people of Afghanistan do not recognize this border at all. So they take a chill pill and they travel between Afghanistan and Pakistan to meet their cousins and come back. In fact, this region did not even have fencing until 2016, because of which Pakistan estimates 50,000 Afghans to be moving back and forth every single day. And here's where Taliban saw an opportunity. And as and when needed, they moved from Afghanistan to Pakistan, recovered, got armed and then attacked again. And not just that, Taliban could freely move material from Afghanistan to Pakistan, use Pakistani hospitals to treat their wounded fighters, communicated with their operational commanders in Afghanistan, and in some instances, they reportedly owned real estate holdings and even had significant business interests in Pakistani cities of Karachi and Peshawar. Now, do you see what an insane advantage this is? Even if American troops knew that these people were there in Pakistan, because American soldiers are bound by international law, they could not cross the border very easily. But Taliban could, because they were anyways outlaws. So although many Taliban fighters died, it was very difficult for the American army to catch hold of all the Taliban fighters at once. Secondly, for connectivity, the Americans planned to build something called the Ring Road. This was nothing but a highway that could connect the most important cities of Afghanistan. It was supposed to run in a 3,200 kilometer loop connecting 4 of the biggest cities in Afghanistan. But again, as the Americans kept on building, the Taliban kept on attacking every once in a while. As a result, the cost of construction of this road went so high that it cost them $5 million for every single mile of construction. And most of it went into deploying security for the workers. So finally, the Ring Road plan was dropped and it never got completed. Eventually, the American or Afghan troops could never actually get the connectivity that they wanted. So although a lot of money was being spent, only God knows how much of it was used and how much was eaten up by the corrupt officials. And if you look at the poverty rates in Afghanistan, it's quite evident that the growth was actually quite insignificant. In fact, you would be surprised to know that in spite of the US spending billions of dollars into Afghanistan, the poverty rate actually increased from 35% in 2007 to 55% in 2016. And lastly, the sad part was that in this tussle between Americans, NATO forces and Taliban, there were a lot of civilian casualties that caused havoc among the innocent citizens. Airstrikes alone caused 500 civilian deaths in 2019. And the total civilian death has even touched 1 lakh people. And you know what? While Taliban was destroying the efforts of the government and Americans, they cleverly took control of the best revenue generating regions of Afghanistan. A classic example of the same was the trade of opium. For those who don't know, opium is used to produce one of the most addictive drugs in the world, which is known as heroin. And Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium. And if you look at the map, here's where in the Helmand province, maximum of opium cultivation is done. And it is one of the most fertile lands in Afghanistan, and more importantly, it shares the border with Pakistan. So not so surprisingly, Taliban took control of this region in 2015 itself. So they could collect protection taxes from the farmers, they were able to ship goods in and out from Pakistan and generate millions of dollars of revenue. Apart from that, BBC says that Taliban generated revenues from foreign funding and mining minerals. And in total, the UN estimates their income to be around $400 million in 2011, and BBC says that by the end of 2018, this may have increased to $1.5 billion a year. This is so much revenue that it's almost equal to the revenue of Ola, Nykaa and Paytm combined. So do you realize the American forces and the Taliban were literally the complete opposite of each other in most aspects? While the Americans were pouring in billions of dollars indirectly funding corruption and pseudo-growth, Taliban actually took control of the most important regions of Afghanistan to generate sustainable revenue for itself. And while the Americans spent a ton of money into building a weak, corrupt government, the Taliban seem to have done a far better job without $1 trillion funding. As a result, in spite of spending billions of dollars into training, the moment the Americans left, the Afghan forces were defeated by Taliban within just 90 freaking days. And during all this time, the government could not do anything because all they had were ghost soldiers who did not even exist and corrupt government officers who didn't even know what to do. This is how the Taliban took control of Afghanistan and burnt a $2.3 trillion hole in the pockets of the United States of America in 20 long years. And the fun fact over here is that the Americans left more than $7 billion worth of US military equipment in Afghanistan while leaving. And this includes vehicles, munitions, guns, communication equipments and even high-tech aircrafts. So yeah, the army that came to protect Afghanistan has practically gifted 56,000 crore worth of weapons to Taliban for free. What a genius, right? This is the story of Afghan war from 2001 to 2021, where the greatest army in the world suffered a defeat in the hands of whom they called a militant group. Now I don't know if this is good or bad, but what I know for sure is that that's not how you spend $2.3 trillion and that's not called nation building. And more importantly, after the death of so many innocent civilians in Afghanistan, after the death of your own soldiers and after 20 long years of occupation, if the output of what you did is next to nothing, that's not how you leave a nation. And this brings me to the last part of the episode, and that are the study materials to help you understand this iconic, ironic Afghan war better. Moving on, the first thing I'm attaching is the American report itself, which will give you an in-depth understanding of the lessons that Americans need to learn from the Afghan war. Secondly, I'm attaching a Johnny Harris video, which will actually tell you who exactly made money out of this long Afghan war that does not make any economic sense at all. And lastly, I am attaching a thinkschool article itself, which will teach you how did US use its superpower and actually make a ton of money in the Iran-Iraqi war. So do have a look at them and let me know what you think. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. And also, don't forget to check out our communication masterclass course from the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.